So, hi Bernardo,
Hi, Francis. Good to see you again.
good to see you. So we're going to be a little more nerdy or scientific today. You know, I spoke most of the time last time, so I let you lead us into this one.
AI and consciousness. Um, what I come across most with people who are sort of dipping their toes into idealism and philosophies of consciousness that place consciousness as the fundamental level of reality. A lot of people seem to derive what I consider to be a false implication, which is that if consciousness underlies everything, then every single thing has a private consciousness of its own. Like my bottle of water has a private conscious inner life of its own. And that is not at all what idealism implies. And I don't think that's what non-duality implies either. The notion is that what we call matter is an appearance of mental processes. There are only processes in consciousness. But the question that then arises is what qualifies as a real thing as opposed to a subset of the pixels on the screen of perception, right? I seem to qualify as a real thing because if I stick a needle in my arm, I feel it. If I stick a needle in the arm of my armchair, I don't feel it. So there seems to be a boundary that defines some sense of privateness to my inner life. But I don't think inanimate things are separate entities from the rest of the inanimate universe. I think we carve out the inanimate universe into things merely for convenience. It's like attributing words to things that are not things, like a fist. We have a word for a fist, but well, the fist just disappeared. Well, it's because there was never a fist. There was a configuration of nature that we gave a name to, but then we mistake the structure of the universe for the structure of language. We think that everything we have a noun for, a word for, qualifies as a separate thing that then should have a private conscious inner life of its own. I don't think a bottle has a private conscious inner life of its own, even though the matter in the bottle is the appearance of conscious processes in the consciousness of nature. But I don't think there is anything it is like to be the bottle in and of itself, just as there doesn't seem to be anything it is like to be a single neuron in my head. There is only something it is like to be Bernardo as a whole. So I think in the same way, there is something it is like to be the inanimate universe as a whole. All inanimate matter is a partial appearance of conscious processes happening in the mind of the universe, in the consciousness of the universe. But the subsets of the universe that we carve out in language are just that. They are just fictions, things we carve out for convenience, and therefore they don't necessarily have a conscious inner life of their own. I don't think computers, for instance, qualify as things. I don't think they have conscious inner lives of their own, even though a computer is the partial image of some conscious process happening in the mind of nature at large.
I think there is a fundamental confusion in this matter, and because the word conscious is used, but is full of ambiguity. We should have two words. One that refers to the first-person experience, through which I know that I am conscious. But if I am a physician at the emergency room and someone comes comatose, or I declare this person unconscious, but that is based on third-person experience, right? I ask questions, no responding, cannot follow my finger with the eyes, etc., declared unconscious. Then the guy comes out of the coma and says that while all of that was happening, he had all these first-person experiences. Therefore, the two don't coincide, right? And because then, regarding third-person consciousness, it is attributed to an object appearing in consciousness. A body, a human body, a dog, a spider, they are declared conscious. A plant, we don't know. A mountain, a planet, an electron. Yes, but that's panpsychism, right? We attribute consciousness to object, and if we go down that road, yes, why not a computer? But there is a fundamental question that we have to ask first. Number one, what is an object, right? Right? Do objects exist? And second question, can consciousness be, the first person consciousness, can it be attributed to an object? Or is an object just as a human body simply a device through which universal consciousness perceives or seems to perceive in a more idealist perspective? You see, so the question is about removing consciousness, the perceiver in chief, away from all the objects of perceptions, because there is no experiential evidence in support of this.
Yeah, whatever conclusion we try to extract is necessarily indirect, right? It is not really a conclusion of certainty, but a best guess. In integrated information theory, which I think is the best, most elaborate theory of the contents of consciousness we have today, they talk in terms of absolute existence. So things that have absolute existence exist for themselves. There is something it is like to be them. And then there is relative existence, which is things that exist only to an external observer. For instance, if I close my eyes and I imagine a green elephant, that green elephant exists to me. It is still made of consciousness, but it's my consciousness. It appears in consciousness. It is not conscious. It doesn't have a private conscious point of view of its own. In other words, it does not have absolute existence. It only has relative existence. So this is conceptual clarification. But when we try to start applying this to things without more theoretical grounding, and I speak from a theoretical perspective. I understand that first-person ground is much better. But from a theoretical perspective, if we start attributing a private conscious point of view to things, we quickly run into absurdity. For instance, my dinner table is a thing. I have a word for it, so it's a thing.
What is
my dinner table?
Yeah.
Right? I have a word for it. So one could ask the question, is my dinner table conscious? Now, assume that the answer is, we think it is conscious. My dinner table is conscious. What if I remove one of the 6 legs of my dinner table? Does the leg now have a consciousness separate from the rest of the dinner table? Or a rock in a mountain. There is a storm and then the mountain is conscious, you think, and then there is a storm and it dislodges a rock and the rock comes bouncing down the side of the mountain. When it's in the air, does it have a private consciousness of its own? And when it bounces on the mountain, does it merge with the mountain again? You see, we run into all these kinds of funny questions, like if the river is conscious, where does the river end and the ocean begin? Right?
Because the river is only a concept in our mind, right?
Exactly.
And the H2O molecules are also a concept, and the leptons and quarks and gluons are also a concept in our mind. It's a way of dividing the, yes.
Yeah, we project our own conceptual structure onto nature, and we think that our conceptual structure should be the ontological structure of nature, which is an absurd movement, right? And of course, we have no reason to think that.
Yeah, nature always comes first.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's where people go wrong when they hear an idealist saying everything exists in consciousness, they think that the idealist is saying everything is conscious. No, that's not the statement. The statement is everything exists in consciousness. That doesn't mean that everything we have a word for has a private conscious point of view of its own.
That's obvious.
Yeah, it's obvious to us, but I learned over time that for a lot of people, it's not. Even if you give the explanation, they still come back and say, no, but no, it should imply that everything is conscious. And no, why? Why should it imply that? There is some deeply ingrained animist intuition in people.
Because their belief relies on the understanding that, or on the belief that there are separate entities, separate physical entities, and whereas in fact everything is interconnected, and everything is in a state of flux, always changing, always. And in fact, there is only one single thing, right? Yeah. One single reality, which is evolving within itself, just as the ocean moves as waves. The ocean doesn't move out of itself to a different place. The Pacific Ocean doesn't become the Atlantic Ocean all of a sudden being transported, because for the reality, there is no otherness, there is no other place or other time to be, right? So the movement is within itself. It's one aspect, the dynamic aspect, and there is the static aspect. Yeah.
I think we tend to mistake doings for things. In other words, behavior for entities. I've become known some time ago for using the metaphor of a whirlpool, talking of human private consciousness as a kind of whirlpool in the ocean of consciousness. That,
I use the same metaphor.
You will resonate with it then. If you look at the whirlpool, pretend that that's what we are. It's a whirlpool. And then people ask, well, do we then exist as real entities? And of course, the answer is no, because for the whirlpool to be a thing, as opposed to a behavior of the lake, you would have to be able to fish it out of the lake, put it under your arm, and carry the whirlpool home with you. But you can't do that. Why? The answer is there are no whirlpools as things.
There is the river.
Yeah, there is the river, and the river does things, and its doings can be physically characterized. The whirlpool has a diameter, has a position, has a speed, or a ripple. A ripple has a height, has a width, has a direction of movement. All of these stuff you can characterize physically. You can point at a ripple or at a whirlpool and say, there is a whirlpool, it's over there. And the same way you can point at Bernardo and say, there is Bernardo, it's over there. Well, but Bernardo is not a thing for the same reason that although you can point at the ripple is not a thing, it's something the lake is doing. And you can characterize that doing through physical parameters, but it doesn't make it a thing. Otherwise, you should be able to fish out the ripple out of the lake and take it home with you.
There is only one reality. That's what it boils down to. Whether we call it consciousness or being, there is only one reality. And I think that the way to understand that is that if you assume that there are two realities, right, and that, let's say there is consciousness and there is the object perceived by consciousness, physical or not, for this perception to occur and to be a valid perception, it should be a valid interaction between two realities. But the moment these two realities interact, they have to belong to the same level of reality, otherwise it's not possible, right?
That's the interaction problem, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I cannot interact with a person that appeared in my dream last night. It's too late. I cannot recall this person and talk to them because I belong to a different level of reality, right? So it's the same here. That which perceives, that which is perceived, have to belong to the same level of reality, but then this level of reality to which they both belong is the ultimate reality of both of them. Right?
Necessarily. It cannot be otherwise. Yeah.
Therefore, the ultimate reality of consciousness, that which perceives, has to be the ultimate reality of the world it perceives. But if we ask ourselves that what is to us experientially the ultimate reality of consciousness, which is first the reality of our consciousness, the answer is whatever really perceives, right?
Because it's of the same nature.
Because everything which is not the ultimate reality of consciousness falls short from really perceiving. It only apparently perceives.
Yeah.
But it cannot really perceive. So when we talk about consciousness in the first person, we can only talk about the absolute reality of consciousness, experientially.
And everything else has to be that too. Otherwise, there could not be interaction. This is a deep problem in philosophy. It's the interaction problem. Not everybody agrees with it. But I agree. And the way I would state the position is this. If you postulate that there are two fundamental but ontologically distinct things, then per force they cannot interact. Because the interaction presupposes a common ground of some sort, so they cannot be fundamentally distinct. They have to be just constructs in a deeper layer of reality that is the same, and in which they both exist, and therefore they don't exist absolutely as things. There is only one absolute thing, which is the ground on which interactions occur. And since all interactions we can know of, because knowledge is mediated by consciousness, right? Everything we can know of, per force, needs to be part of that common ground. Otherwise, nothing would interact. We wouldn't even know whatever else exists. So my mind cannot be fundamentally distinct from yours. Otherwise, we couldn't be having this conversation.
Exactly.
Right? This is difficult for people because since the Enlightenment, we have developed this tendency or this preference, this sort of knee-jerk reaction to try to analyze, to break things into smaller parts, as opposed to really comprehending what is going on. And we get lost in this game of finding the proper parts, and we miss the forest for the trees. And then we try to build our way back, because after we analyzed everything, now we have all these little building blocks, and then we mistake those building blocks for really separate things, and we try to reconstruct then the only reality we can access, which is the unity of consciousness. And of course, that's impossible. It's called the combination problem in philosophy. It's impossible to solve. It's incoherent. And then we get all confused, wondering, where did we go wrong? It's the bane of our society and culture today.
Yes. So, if there is only one reality, which is a conclusion, because it's a case where the whole is more than the sum of its parts. That
there aren't even parts. You could
exactly.
argue.
Yeah, the parts are just our human ability to abstract, which is very, very good to do science, right? That's what we do. We separate the system from the measuring apparatus, and we make this measurement, and so that's the way we see interference as interaction between two wave systems, whereas in fact the Maxwell equations they take care of everything in one single shot.
Yeah, there is only the electromagnetic field. Yeah.
So yes, so that leads us to conscious objects and conscious computers.
I don't think they are. I don't think they or will be, because I don't think there is such a thing as a computer. It's like It's like looking at Van Gogh's Starry Night, that beautiful, moving painting of Van Gogh, looking at it and saying, okay, all the pixels with an orange color, I will call them a thing. Well, you may do that, but it's purely nominal. It's entirely arbitrary. It may be convenient to do that, because then we can paste a word onto it and then refer only to that word. But it doesn't mean that there is that thing. We mistake our convenient theoretical fictions for realities.
Yeah, and that's it. And that's only one way to cut the carrot, so to speak. You can cut it longitudinally, transversally, right? And it's always the same carrot, but you can look at it either in the space-time dimension or in the canonical conjugate momentum energy configuration. So these are different ways to look at things. We have to divide to try to understand something, and it's a very legitimate approach, of course, for science. But on the absolute level, it doesn't work.
That's where we go wrong. We take convenient fictions or convenient theoretical entities for things. Did you read an essay by Hedda Hasselmoch that was published last week about every person being a single person? There being only one person, and what she means is there is only one consciousness. It's a wonderful essay.
There is only one person, of course. If there is only one consciousness, of course, the real person, yeah.
And she uses thought experiments from different philosophers sort of to ease the reader into realizing that is absolutely obvious. There is just no other way to interpret reality. I'm not a meditator. I'm not good at that. I deal with the cards that nature handed me. So I instead of trying to introspect, which I find very difficult, I come up with thought experiment. So I had this thought experiment the other day. Well, some time ago. It goes like this, and the idea is to show that you are everybody else, and everybody else is you. And to show that is absolutely self-evident. And it goes like this. Imagine that you have a friend, and the friend is sitting across the room from you, and you're very different people, very different personalities, different memories, different lives, and so on. But then your friend is wearing a camera and a speaker in his head. And the signal from the camera and the speaker go into a virtual reality headset that you are wearing. So you know that you are you and you're not your friend, but you can see the world now from the perspective of your friend. But you know what's going on. Yeah, you're perceiving through the perspective of your friend, but you still know that you're you and not your friend, right? Okay, next step. Now, there is a perfect telepathy apparatus, some new technology, and now you can not only perceive the world from the perspective of your friend.
The thoughts of the friend.
You can now you can have access to your friend's memories. You can remember everything your friend remembers, but you still know that those are not your memories, right? You're just wearing a virtual reality headset that conveys your friend's perceptions and memories to you, but you know you're you and you're not your friend. Okay, now you have access to your friend's thoughts and emotions. It's not you. It's just like television, but felt television. These are weird emotions. They are not really yours. You're you because you remember the narrative of your life. You have context. And you know that. And now you go completely on music. Now try to figure out that you're not your friend. Of course you are your friend for the exact same reason that you are your past self, which was a completely different creature, but you think it was you. And you worry about death because you know that you are your future self. But for exactly the same reasons, you must be everybody else. It is unavoidable.
This thought experiment shows that for most people, they identify with, because what you say that then you are your friends, it's only true if you identify with that which is experienced. Because what you have done is progressively substitute your experience for the experience of your friend, right? That cleverly eliminating. So then if I identify with experienced stuff, right? Then it's true. But if I am not, if I remain as the experiencer and not the experienced, I am always the same, right?
Yeah. And you have no beginning, you have no end. You are what there is. Where are you going to go? Right? Where can you possibly disappear into? But yes, we mistake the excitations of consciousness for identity. It's like, it's like a guitar string. It can play many different notes. You can pluck it in different ways and it plays a different note because it gets excited in a different way. But there is nothing to any of those notes other than the guitar string itself, just vibrating in one or another way, or a drum head just vibrating in one and another way. But we think we are the notes. And therefore we identify with a particular doing of the guitar string. And we forget that we are the thing that does the doing. But for most people, even if they become intellectually convinced of it, it is far from obvious for them. And to be honest with you, Francis, for me, during the first years, it was not emotionally obvious to me. It happened very slowly that it sort of come down. I didn't even try it. I thought it would never happen because I just don't have that kind of disposition. But slowly it caught me off guard. One day I woke up and I'm like, damn, it really happened, And now it's absolutely obvious to me.
Sometimes people say, when they have a first experience with psychedelic drugs, because all of a sudden it changes everything. It places them in a different place from their usual, and this thing becomes obvious. Not that I am suggesting to do that. No. But yeah.
Have you done it? Have you ever done psychedelics?
Yeah, I've done a little, a long time ago. Yeah. And, also, you were mentioning something earlier on, and the fact that we are able to communicate. Schrödinger, in his book, he has a chapter on that. And in the beginning, it didn't attract much my attention, but he's quite right. He said, what is extraordinary, in fact, is that we are able to communicate at all. Yes. You see, because the meaning is not information. It's easy to understand that we can exchange, we can code in ones and zeros everything we are exchanging right now, you and I. And in fact, that's what is going on because our communication is digitalized, right? So right now we are exchanging ones and zeros.
Yes, as we talk, yes.
But we are not exchanging meanings through the one and zeros.
Meaning is evoked somewhere here.
Because the one and zeros, it's a code message. If the message is encrypted, in order for you to get the meaning and for me to get the meaning, we need to be able to decode. So we need a keyword. We need something to decode, right? We need two huge prime numbers or something like that. So, right? But
to unlock the code, yeah.
In order to get that, we need to have been in contact before and to have exchanged the key.
Exchange the keys, yeah. Cryptography, right? One-on-one, yeah. Yeah.
So, the question is, where is the key? An example I like to use is my version of the Chinese room. Where you have a Chinese guy. I know for those who are listening to us, you have a Chinese guy in a room. He doesn't speak neither English nor Dutch. And however, he has at his disposal all kind of a database on English and Dutch.
Chinese in his case.
In Chinese, yes, and a set of instructions how to translate from English to Dutch, commands one by one, which is more or less a translation program. And so you have the guy on one side who sends a message in English, are you having a nice time on your vacation? And the Chinese guy takes the first word, I, follows the instruction, and delivers in Dutch the corresponding message. And the Dutch guy on the other side understands very clearly the content of the message, which is quite simple. However, the guy in the middle has he has processed information, instruction or command by command, exactly like a computer, without having at any time access to the meaning. Right? Which shows that there is not something in the Chinese room that understands. That, in other words, there is not something intelligent. Not saying that for the Chinese guy, no, he is very intelligent in Chinese, but there is not an intelligence that has access to the meaning in the room. The room, and the guy inside, they act like a computer, right? And so we cannot. This proves to me that and if a human system cannot have access to meaning, if we identify, even if with a physical system like a computer, it's even a lesser likelihood that it would have access to meaning, right? To intelligence.
Yeah, and this is a subject very close to me because I regard AI, agentic AI, like large language models, as an enormous opportunity and an enormous danger. People feel that because, say, ChatGPT can give such articulate, clear, correct answers, that it must be equivalent to us in some way, and therefore we are mechanisms. And of course, it's a series of non sequiturs, a series of wrong logical moves. What people don't realize, because more and more it's becoming necessary to have a PhD in AI to understand how those things work. But the way they work is an AI is a geometric transformation engine. It has no idea whatsoever what it's doing. It gets squiggles in, applies a number of geometric transformations on those squiggles, and spits out squiggles. And then people then say, well, but what it spits out has meaning. If it is just a mathematical transformation, where is the meaning coming from? Well, the answer is obvious. The meaning comes from the person who reads the squiggles and from the people who wrote the texts that were used during the training of the AI. In both cases, it's conscious humans. AI without a training set created by humans applying their conscious creativity and intelligence can do nothing.
It's just information processing.
Yeah, it's simply transforming strings written by humans, transforming them so to reuse the original human knowledge that was available during the training set. And AI knows nothing. It does not have a sense of insight, of understanding, of cognition. It just draws geometrical relationships and correlations amongst squiggles. The first thing an AI does when it reads text, it takes words or certain representative parts of words and tokenizes them. Tokenization means you take that text and you transform it in a vector which corresponds to a point in a hyperdimensional space. And then you tokenize everything, and then you start finding the correlations between those tokens based on what you learned during training. And internally, what it does is it takes your question, the words in your question, tokenizes it, and then finds what is the most natural next word. And that's the first word of the answer. Then it appends that word to the end of your question. So now you have your question plus the first word of the answer, and it feeds that back to itself. And it asks, what is the next word after that? So it comes up with another squiggle, appends it, feeds it back to the beginning. What is the next word? All of these are geometric transformations on tokens. There is nowhere any sense of cognition. AI researchers will point out to try to contradict me that things like the attention module, they will group the tokens in areas that are geometrically close to each other. And that is a kind of meaning. No, it's a correlate to meaning. It's a way to map out and model meaning. But the meaning comes from the conscious human beings who wrote the text that allowed the AI to find those groupings. In other words, it's always human creativity and human meaning in the training set and in interpreting the answer. All the AI does is apply geometrical transformations to squiggles. That's all that is happening there. But yeah, to convince people of it when they have a deep existential conversation with ChatGPT, it's becoming very hard. And I think the risk we run is a kind of secular kenosis. We will start regarding ourselves as mechanisms because we know AIs are mechanisms and they behave like us. So we too are mechanism. It's a kind of uber nihilism. And I think that it's incredibly dangerous.
It's amazing. I mean, these instruments are close to passing the Turing test. I am using Grok 3, and it's extraordinary. Not only I tried also DeepSeek. Grok 3 is much better in that sense that DeepSeek gives you a lot of information that is picked up all over the internet and database, but Grok 3 is a much better thinker and can interact with you in a smooth way, very logical. I asked Grok 3 to try to give me the proof of. I asked him two things. First, a simple proof of the Fermat theorem, and then I asked him also a proof of the Riemann conjecture.
Yeah.
So he gave up, and then I asked him also something else. I asked him, can you design a thought experiment that could make the determination whether the world we see outside exists independently from consciousness or not? And he came up with an experiment. So yes. He inspired from the Schrödinger cat, and first he made it too complicated, and then I led him to accept that in fact he didn't need this complication. So he said, you have two sealed boxes, and in each of them there is an atom which is going to decay. The decay is measured by a Geiger counter. But before we close the box, we entangle this atom with a photon. Now the photon is outside the box. And now there is a probability that it's going to decay. And the question is, if reality is only in the mind, the thing is not going to decay before we open the box to see the result. In other words, let's say the cat is dead, right? But if the world exists out there independently from us, the photon, the atom is going to decay, and then by doing some quantum interferometry with the photon which is outside the box, but which is entangled, although the box is energetically isolated from the rest of the universe, by making quantum interferometry with the photon which is outside the box, we can determine the moment when the decay happens, and then it would mean that it happens independently from the observation that is made by a human observer, by a consciousness, as we open the box. First, he had put another box as a kind of control, and I observed to him that the other box was not necessary because it was sufficient to make measurements on one box. So he was happy with this.
Yeah, he was happy.
Yes, but then I told him, yes, but imagine everything is in the mind, then the box is in the mind, the photon outside, all the instrumentation is in the mind, and everything will flow exactly how you describe it, in spite of the fact that there is no outside world.
Yeah.
And then he said, oh, yes, you're right.
There is, it's going on the internet now, what is claimed to be a post by Sam Altman, the boss of OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT. And I don't know whether it's true, whether he really posted that, because in the internet you can't trust anything. But the claim is Sam, testing, I think, ChatGPT 4.5, asked ChatGPT to tell him, Sam, what ChatGPT thinks is the most plausible hypothesis about the nature of reality and the nature of consciousness, without leaning on what it has read, but purely by reasoning from first principles. And ChatGPT's answer was something to the effect that consciousness obviously exists, but matter is tentative. We have no direct access to that. So it basically gave an idealist, non-dual answer, which is interesting. I mean, I still don't take it seriously, even though I agree with it. I still don't take it very seriously because I know how AIs work. I'm in the process of building one of those. But it is interesting that from a mechanistic perspective, starting from first principles, it immediately arrives at this answer that I thought was interesting.
What you're saying, just if we go back then to idealism versus realism, there is a form of idealism a la Berkeley, for instance, which is limiting, because then it substitutes, you remember the distinction we made between consciousness and mind. Mind is a restriction, is a restricted form. It's like a consciousness with a tube that limits its vision, or with a filter. But if you remove, because then we tend to have a representation of consciousness which is human mind-like, which is anthropomorphic, right? Now, if we have no representation of consciousness, no conceptual representation of consciousness. In other words, consciousness is no longer seen as thought-like. And on the other hand, if we have no conceptual representation of the world, what we call the physical world, the part of our experience that is subjected to the intersubjective agreement, right? If we have no a preconceived notion of the outside world as being matter-like. And we are in the not knowing about the reality of this outside world, just as we have no preconceived notion that consciousness is thought-like, then it makes possible it makes the equation reality equal consciousness possible.
Absolutely.
You see?
Yeah. That is the key difference between Bishop Berkeley's subjective idealism and what we today call objective formulations of idealism. Under objective idealism, people would say, well, there are consciousness processes outside those conscious processes that I identify with. In other words, there is a world outside this invention called Bernardo Kastrup, because Bernardo Kastrup doesn't really exist. It's like a whirlpool. It's a doing of the lake. So there are things beyond the boundaries of the whirlpool, because the only thing that exists is the lake. The whirlpool is not even really there. It's a particular pattern of behavior. It's not an entity. But Bishop Berkeley seems to implicitly accept that whirlpools are entities. Beavers, you and I, are real entities. Therefore, Bishop Berkeley, yeah. It's like saying that the lake outside this business that is nature, person, because the person itself is a kind of a fiction, right? Is a narrative self, as we call it. So under objective idealism, there is the whole lake, and the whirlpools are doings. So to be is not to be perceived. To be is to exist for itself.
Yes,
to have absolute existence.
But Bernardo, already, even if the moment we use the word processes, right? Mm-hmm. We already have some kind of a model, right? Because a process, for instance, implies time.
Yes.
And that is useful. That may be useful scientifically, but from an ontologic vantage point, right? It's a little bit further down the levels of reality.
It's a matter of concessions, right? It's where do we make the concession in order to be understood, in order to meet people where they are. If you ask me what I really think, there's no time, there is no space. Reality is what I call the crystal of eternity. It is a pattern of cognitive associations, and it exists. It simply exists. It doesn't exist now or existed or will exist. No, it just is. That's all there is. And time and space are our own cognitive categories to avoid cognitive overload. We just sort of traverse the crystal of eternity through a little slit in order to... Time and space is like our filing system. We divide information about the world into little drawers that you can organize in rows and columns. That's time and space. It's the rows and columns of our cognitive filing system. The problem is that language presupposes time and space. Now, subject and object are distinct because of spatial extension. Past and future are distinct because of temporal extension. We came to the point that we think if there is no extension, there cannot be structure. Of course there can be structure. Cognitive links of meaning do not require any extension. They are understandings, they are experiential from a first-person perspective, and they do not need extension. But we think if there is no time and space out there, then everything collapses into a singularity, and clearly reality has structure. Well, the answer is that structure is conscious structure. It's semantic structure. So this is what I truly think, but I will concede time and space when I'm talking to most people, because otherwise it becomes very difficult to open one's mouth and say something coherent.
That's true. And but nevertheless, we have to be open that this singularity is the reality of everything, in which there is no space and time. When you were talking about, this extension in space-time, there is this thought that is interesting, because we feel that we can experience two locations in space simultaneously. But it's obvious that we cannot experience simultaneously two moments in time.
Because otherwise there wouldn't be two moments in time.
Yeah? But it escapes, this simple thing escapes most people, because if it is true that we cannot simultaneously experience two moments in time, that is only one single moment, it follows that we cannot really experience two objects simultaneously.
Yeah.
Without making them one.
Yeah. There is something else sometimes I use as a device to try to express myself to people, which is the following. It's because people have an enormous intuitive difficulty to understand this notion that you are me and I am you, and this thing is talking to itself across extension. What I try to do is the following. I say, look, everybody believes that they were their 5-year-old self, right? We don't have a problem with that. Even though the 5-year-old self had a different body, had a different thoughts, different views, opinions, dispositions, everything was different. We don't have difficulty in understanding that we are this thing now, but we are also our 5-year-old selves, because it's different points in time.
I use the same. I know what you are going to say. We have a problem.
Yeah, you and I are the same thing in different points in space.
That you and I, we have a problem believing that you and I are the same self, right?
Yeah, but it's for the same reason that people believe they were their 5-year-old selves, based on exactly the same rationale. It is entirely plausible that you are me and I am you right now.
Just as the self spans across time, it can span across minds.
Yes, and across space, what we call
space. Yes.
Yeah. This resonates somewhat, but it's very difficult for people to intuitively grasp this. That's why I think this essay by Hedda last week was so good, because she uses several thought experiments from other philosophers as well, not only me and herself, but others as well. One of them is there is a surgery they do for people with untreatable epilepsy, in which they sever the corpus callosum, the connection between the two hemispheres of the brain. And there is good clinical evidence, and even experimental evidence, that the consciousness does divide in two. Both consciousness will still identify with the original one. They will still say, nothing is different, I'm still me. But the other side is saying the same thing. Nothing's different, I'm still me, because they inherit the memories, but they act differently. For instance, one hemisphere controls, the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body, and the right hemisphere controls the left. And what they do with their hands is different, because they're controlled by two different hemispheres. And the thought experiment is like this. Okay, now let's take the evidence on face value. There are two consciousnesses now, because you severed the connection between the two halves of the brain. Did the original subject die and was replaced by two? Or if you sever the corpus callosum and then you kill one half of the brain, the other half survives, would you then say that the surviving half is the original person? But if you do that, when the other half is still alive, then you have to say the person now is duplicated. And you get into all kinds of funny things, or a teleporter from Star Trek. Suppose that you can be teleported from the Earth to the Moon, and the way it works is that the transmitter, the teleporter that you enter in order to be teleported, the first thing it does is it kills you. and it decomposes you into individual molecules. And it finds out where the positions of those molecules were in your body. But to do that, it basically has to kill you. And then it reconstructs you on the moon. And when you are reconstructed on the moon, you still have your own memories. This is under materialist assumptions. You still have your memory, and you would still think, I am the same person. Are you really? Or did you die on one side and was born on the other, and it just happens that you have the same memories? What about when you are teleported to two places? Because you can be reconstructed in more than one place. Which one is you? Is everyone you? Or is none of them you? And of course, the only coherent answer to all these thought experiments is that there is only one you going on. Everything else is just circumstance. Is just contents of consciousness, is just particular narratives, particular subsets of experience. But there is only one subject, what Schopenhauer referred to as the one eye of the world that looks out from all eyes.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's the only way to make sense of vanilla, banal reality. It does not need sophistication. You don't need to go to quantum weirdness. The only way to make sense of the simplest and obvious in-your-face facts of existence is there is only one subject. Everything else collapses very quickly if you think it through.